Okay, kinesiology 223. This is chapter 23. This is presentation number 6. This is the last one for this chapter. Professionalization of children's sports. And I've talked a little bit about this in terms of specialization and how it can be detrimental in the process. And I would say, as they're talking this through, this would be a lot of what we've already reflected upon in terms of specialization. They're just kind of repackaging it in terms of professionalization. Get me out of here. All right. Um, with professionalization, it takes away from a holistic athletic development. I talked about it before in terms of many times your best athletes are ones that played several different sports growing up. Perhaps they did a little wrestling, they did some basketball, they played some baseball, they played some football, some hockey. And so they have this skill set that's been developed from playing multiple sports. And it gives them an ability to carry over one thing to another sport to another sport. But from a developmental standpoint, it has taxed and challenged their body from a stressor standpoint in different ways and allow them to adapt and grow with these different stressors placed upon them. And when you're in a highly specialized environment, you're a pitcher, you have a pitching coach, you're throwing however many times a week, you're probably going to have some overuse injuries. If you have this kind of holistic approach where you're doing multiple sports, it kind of takes away from that because you're working in different areas and you're taxing the body differently. And it also helps in terms of not only developmental, but it overall on a holistic mindset or holistic program design set, if you will, if I can say it like that, it holistically stimulates growth on different areas of the body. With this, when you play different sports, if you're not specializing or being highly professionalized, it shifts the goal away from things like winning and rankings and earning accolades and scholarships, which are very outcome oriented, to being able to focus on process and do different things and even different social structures. Your hockey players might be a little bit different than your football players, than your soccer players. So you're going to have different social aspects as well. Early sports specialization with year-round intense training and private coaching. Again, you're really taking the kind of locus of control away from your youth athlete, and you're just basically shuttling them from next thing to next thing to next thing to next thing, and they really don't have the time to be a kid. And the other part of it is it places an unfair burden, and you can say on the parents because they're the ones driving them around, but it places an unfair burden of performance and creates higher trait anxiety and then therefore state anxiety in that youth athlete because they feel as though they have to overperform to be able to make up for all the driving around to different things and different programs they've been involved with the professionalization, the aspect of this. When you look at this, most everybody is quite frankly opposed to it because it focuses everything or the majority of resources only on the most talented children and it ignores the majority of young people who are physically and psychologically socially developed who still need to socially develop through sport. So you start pushing towards this elitism and you have a team full of elite players and the next thing you know, your house league is no longer valid. You don't have a lot of players in house. Everybody is either playing travel or they're not playing at all. It becomes this kind of all or nothing proposition like, well, I didn't make travel. I must not be good. And so the athlete looks at that and says, I'm not good enough to play baseball anymore. I think I'm going to quit. And they're going to retire at 10 years old because they're playing house league and not travel. Nonsense. So, you have to have this in the case of working with your athletes to get them to understand that they need, they need the opportunities. There has to be opportunities to play different sports. And even though they might not make travel, they can at least play house league. And house league is a great place to learn some skills and develop. But the other part of this is with house league will usually have a less intensive schedule, like in baseball, than travel. And so as a result, your athletes can get by with playing baseball, attending practice, not having to travel to Iowa or go to a hitting coach or to a sprint coach, and they can maybe perhaps do another sport activity and they get away from that professionalization and specialization and a more broad-based holistic approach. So they talk about this. You have the myth associated with professionalized approach. You need to really think of this in terms of, does it actually benefit a person long term? Does it benefit your athlete big picture? And to a certain degree, physiologically, no. Psychologically and emotionally, no, it does not. So they list these 7 myths that are associated with this, and maybe take a few moments to kind of review these. So you have 1, 2, and 3 here, and you can pause and read through. Right? We know from a programming design that more isn't always better. When you look at stages of talent and development, I will say this: you may have somebody who's like a tall kid who's growing faster than everybody else, so he's able to play at a certain level and the other kids can't, and all of a sudden all the other kids get their growth spurt and meet up to him, and next thing you know, the one who was tall is now short compared to everybody else and he feels inferior. So a certain regard, you have to look at this in terms of being able to integrate in and have skill development built into the equation, because during that age, your kids are going to have growth spurts and get bigger and get taller, and they're going to have developmental changes that'll be like sprinting, and then all of a sudden they're kind of crawling along, slowly developing, then they get like a growth spurt. So, in some regards, you have to have a constant in the process, and the constant is talent development per se. You have to have almost like this kind of drip campaign to teach skills over and over. And having been a person who has taught youth athletes how to run faster throughout my career, I don't know how many times I've had a middle school kid and we've taught speed work to them. They've gotten much faster. They're able to do all the ABC drills I can throw at them and all the different variations I can come up with that are particular to their sport. They go home on a Friday, they come back on a Monday, they're 2 inches taller, and they had this growth spurt, and we have to relearn how to do everything because they got taller. Their limbs are longer, their tendons are tighter, their muscles are different. And it's part of the developmental process of kids getting bigger as they age and developing as they age. And so as a coach, there are times where you have to maybe do things like back off the intensity of training and go back to skill development. Maybe, just maybe, you go back to some of the fundamental things that you did early on, because you have to reintroduce those skills because your athlete has just had a growth spurt. You have to have a patient mindset and a stewardship mindset when you coach this group. It's not immediacy, it's long term. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let you kind of marinate on this, and I'm going to jump to the next slide. That's the last one. Give you a second there to pause me. Moving on. All right, parental support. Oh, man. Parents can interpret parental support differently, and some of it think it's like an all-in thing. Others just think they come up, they open the side of the minivan, the kid hops out, and they brought in their practice, and that's parental support. It just depends on the social structure of the family. Now, there is no doubt that children will feel parental support different, and they'll feel support in terms of being driven to practice, going to hitting camps, being driven to Iowa to play in a tournament. I say it all the time. But they also feel the feedback from parents differently. So children younger than 10, the child feels greater effect from parental feedback. They'll really just have that kind of visceral response to that feedback. Maybe or maybe not be able to understand it depending on the technical proficiency of the athlete and also the technical proficiency of the parent. But that's a thing. There might be a gap between those two in terms of the ability to convey what needs to be fixed at a level for a 10-year-old versus the 10-year-old interpreting that information. That's a gap. And the parents many times just don't have an understanding that there's a developmental component there, that you can be in a position where you're talking in the minivan on the way home about all these different great technical skills that maybe they need to integrate into their programming. They have no idea what you're talking about because you're talking at 30,000 feet and they're flying at 10,000 feet. Now, when you have athletes together and they're older than 10 years old, it's the peer feedback, what they get from their friends, that is more important. So under than 10 from the parents, older than 10 from their peers. It kind of changes when they hit that 10 years old. but it's a balance, right? It's a balance that can exist, but you have to, as a coach, be able to implement these things in, right? And you you have to be able to implement in um, from a parental standpoint, being able to work with your athlete, not have your 10-year-old baseball player become a professional. And, you know, as a coach, you have to be able to articulate some of these things to your parents because your parents might have the best of intentions to create a better athlete, but they're actually having detrimental results. So when you look at this, they talk about, based on interviews and focus groups of 90 youth tennis players, parents, and coaches, it was found that optimal parent involvement includes the parents doing these things: sharing and communicating goals, developing and understanding emotional climate, and maintaining this strong parent coach relationship. So the parent should not be undermining the coach at the dinner table, even though Johnny might be upset with not starting. Be less judgmental, and I would say of the coach, of the league, of the other people on the team, the opponents, as well as their own child. So the judginess can come on many different fronts. And this, they're talking about tennis, so keeping tennis in perspective and focusing on multiple benefits and not being outcome oriented like a win. You're going for the win. Engaging in enhancing parenting actions at competitions, such as being aware of their own behavior, facilitating communication regarding their child's needs, fostering independence, and holding their child accountable for their own behavior. And I think that's key. If a child has an outburst, as a parent, you have to be able to kind of pull your child down from that ledge and be like, hey, you need to settle down because it's taking you out of your game. So there's different things that you can do. Now, as a coach, you may have to articulate to these to some parents, because some parents might not conceptually understand that these are really good goals to have. But that becomes a conversation about how you're going to create your team culture and team environment. So with this, you got to educate the parents, right? And this becomes how they can have a better experience while watching their child play. They list numerous issues: psychological, physiological, access to activities and structural, cultural. I'm not going to bury you in these, but if we go through just like physical issues here, I'll let you take a read there. We go into psychological issues here. You have access and structural issues. Then we get into, let me scroll back down, cultural issues. Then you get into, after cultural issues, issues associated with significant others, economic issues, governmental, legislative, and translational science and program evaluation. So maybe take a little bit of time to pause each one of those and just kind of review those. But to that end, guys, I can't stress this enough. If we're going to work in the realm of youth athletics, as a coach, you have to have a strong enough persona to be able to create the culture, be able to articulate the culture, and then enforce the cultural norms that you want in your program. And that's going to come from you and your athletes interacting, but also you need to interact with the parents as well to set expectations with them. So with that, I'm going to sign off from here and I'm going to move on. Guys, see you later.